I recall the precise instant when everything in my life fell apart. It happened on a cool October day, the sort of day when sunlight shines through the fading leaves and reminds you that summer is truly over. I stood in our bedroom, looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror, straightening my tie for a crucial appointment. My phone vibrated one time. Then it buzzed a second time. Somehow, I sensed it was bad news, and my heart dropped. I wish I could claim it was something small, maybe an email or a text from a coworker that revealed the truth, but it was not subtle in the least. My phone's screen filled with multiple messages from a strange number, each one mentioning my wife. Initially, I assumed it had to be some kind of joke. I scrolled through them, sensing my face turn pale. The mystery sender gave me specific information, dates, times, and even pictures of her with another man. That was the moment numbness washed over me. My hands trembled, and I placed my phone on the dresser, not sure how to proceed. I glanced back at my reflection, hardly recognizing the person looking at me. Meanwhile, my wife, Juliana, was downstairs in the kitchen, humming softly while she poured a cup of coffee. We had been husband and wife for 7 years. 7 years spent dividing expenses, building hopes, going through typical highs and lows, and trusting that our devotion to each other was solid. It seemed like our wedding day had happened just a few months earlier. I could vividly see her wearing that plain white gown, tears in her eyes, as she promised faithfulness, respect, and love until death separated us. Apparently, those promises had a time limit. Early signs. I should have sensed something was wrong. Looking back, I see that the signs were always there. She began arriving home later than normal around half a year before that day in October. Initially, she explained it was due to new tasks at her job, a major project that needed her total focus. I felt proud of her drive to succeed at work. I even encouraged the extra hours, truly thinking it was a brief sacrifice that would ultimately be worth it. When her late nights became weekend obligations, I never doubted her. Occasionally, she would whisper on the phone, stepping outside with a sorry look, telling me it was a coworker with a troubled life, or her supervisor asking about looming deadlines. I never pressed for more information. I had always been the trusting type, perhaps to an extreme. Then there was the shift in her style. Juliana usually wore simple but tasteful outfits, like pencil skirts and modest tops for work, then jeans and comfy sweaters at home. But around the same time these new tasks arose, she began wearing clothes that were more revealing. She wore high heels, fancy dresses, and stronger perfumes. I praised her appearance, saying she looked gorgeous. And indeed, she shone with a self-assurance and charm that captivated me and everyone else. I convinced myself she was just finding a fresh way to express herself. After all, we all change as we get older, correct? I also saw new patterns in how she used her phone. She became more protective of it, altering her passcode, and sometimes smiling at texts in a manner that made me question who might be messaging. Yet every time I felt a hint of suspicion, I pushed it away. Pointing fingers without proof seemed paranoid and rude. I believed if something was really wrong, she would inform me. Isn't honesty the foundation of marriage? But on that morning, the texts from the mysterious number made it impossible to deny. They listed the who, the when, and even gave some clues about why. It completely destroyed me. That first confrontation. I can't explain how I managed to go downstairs, my phone clutched in a sweaty grip, my heart pounding like a hummingbird's wings. Juliana was there, quietly sipping coffee, the bright morning light reflecting off her hair. She smiled at me, the same warm smile that once comforted me. This time, it felt like countless tiny needles pricking my skin. I started off gently. I told her I'd gotten some strange messages about her, hinting there might be someone out to cause problems. She froze in place. I noticed her entire body go rigid, as if she were gearing up for a fight. Her face lost all color, and she glanced at the phone in my hand. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of both fear and guilt. Then, as though a switch had been flicked inside her, she forced a laugh. "That's absurd," she said, taking a careful sip from her coffee mug, though I saw her hand shaking. "Who would send you something like that? It's probably just junk mail." I showed her the pictures. They clearly showed her walking out of a restaurant while a man rested his hand on her lower back. Another shot caught them embracing in a car. The timestamps were from a few weeks ago. She went completely pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. She tried to speak, but no words would come out. A whole minute passed before she managed to say anything. "It's not what it seems," she finally said, her voice small and defeated. "He's just a coworker, he's going through a rough patch. I was giving him a ride home." Yet there was no reasonable excuse for the way he held her, the way their eyes lingered, the intimacy in the pictures. Juliana never acted so touchy with casual acquaintances, and she certainly never let them touch her like that. It was clearly an affair, or the beginning of one. Even so, I refused to see the worst. We had built an entire life together, for crying out loud. Our home, our ideas about having kids someday, the vacations we had taken. I couldn't toss all that aside because of a few snapshots. But in my gut, I sensed the unknown sender was being honest, and that Juliana was deceiving me. Maybe she had been deceiving me for months. I wanted to shake her, demand an explanation, but I was so hurt I could barely breathe. "Juliana," I said quietly, "if you tell me the truth now, it'll be easier for me to forgive you. But if you lie, if you keep lying, there's no turning back." My voice shook. Tears stung the corners of my eyes. She lowered her gaze, stared at her hands cradling the coffee mug, and took a long breath. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, then began to sob. She admitted she had grown close to this coworker and that they had crossed a line. She insisted it was just a lapse in judgment, something that happened after a night out with colleagues. She claimed she never intended to hurt me. The whole thing felt unreal. As she spoke, I felt the walls closing in on me. My wife, my Juliana, was confessing to betrayal. Part of me wanted to shout, to kick her out, to curse the day we met. Another part felt the urge to comfort her, wipe away her tears, and say we could somehow make it through. The truth is, I did love her. I'd been in love with her for 7 years. I wasn't prepared to lose everything. And maybe, just maybe, I clung to the hope that this was a one-off mistake. People err. "I need some time," I finally said, my eyes on the floor. "I need to think this through." She tried to take my hand, but I pulled away, unwilling to feel her touch. Instead, I picked up my car keys and drove to work, my head spinning with unanswered questions. The shattered illusion. That day at work felt like a haze. I can hardly remember the specific details of the meeting I was supposed to attend. All I recall is sitting at my desk, staring at the digital clock, hoping the minutes would move faster. My phone stayed face down beside me, silent. No new messages arrived from the unknown sender, and there was only one text from Juliana that said, "I'm sorry. I love you." By lunchtime, a pounding headache set in. My emotions swung between anger, sadness, disbelief, and a strange numbness that showed up whenever I felt too overwhelmed. My coworkers asked if I was under the weather. I mumbled something about a migraine, which wasn't far from the truth. The throbbing in my head seemed to match the turmoil in my heart. When work ended, I went to a nearby park. I sat on a bench under a tall oak tree, its leaves turning bronze and gold, dropping around me every so often. The calm scenery felt like a cruel contrast to the chaos in my mind. I tried to figure out how it all came to this. We had once been so content, or so I thought. Did I drive her away? Did I fail to meet her needs? Or was it simply her own choice, a void she felt inside? By the time I got home, evening had fallen. Juliana was in the living room, clearly on edge as she waited for me. She rushed over, tears staining her cheeks. She looked so small, so filled with regret. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But remembering the photos and her betrayal made me stay calm and a bit distant. "Let's talk," she said, her voice quivering. "Please, we need to talk about this." I gave a slight nod and slowly took off my jacket. She signaled for me to sit. We ended up across from each other at the dining table, the very table where we had shared countless meals, celebrated special occasions, and joked about everyday life. Now, it felt more like a place for interrogation. "I need you to tell me everything," I said, my voice flat. "No more lies. No more half-truths. If there's any hope left for our marriage, I deserve the full story." So she explained it all. She admitted she had slept with him twice. She insisted it wasn't about love, saying she was confused, drawn in by his attention, and feeling lonely in our marriage for reasons she couldn't fully explain. She said it began with friendly work messages, then moved to confiding in him about her struggles, and finally led to being physical. She sobbed, apologized again and again, and claimed she would end it forever. I listened, my heart tightening with each detail. Part of me wanted to storm out, to shout, to smash something. Yet I remained oddly composed. When she finished, I told her we'd try counseling. I said I was willing to fight for us if her remorse was genuine. At that moment, I honestly thought a single affair, no matter how painful, might be something we could overcome. But I had no clue that this so-called single affair was only the beginning of a much larger heartbreak. Discovery after discovery. In the weeks that followed, we began attending marriage counseling. The meetings were uncomfortable and painful, but they uncovered some deep communication problems. Juliana revealed that she felt undervalued at home. I acknowledged that my own job had taken over my life, making her feel alone. Despite the tension that lingered between us like a constant shadow, we both appeared determined to mend things. Then new texts from that mysterious number started appearing again. To start with, the messages were short and puzzling. "Ask her about the manager in Chicago. Don't you want to know what happened while you were on a business trip?" These also came with more photos, some so personal I could hardly look at them without seething in anger. The pictures were dated months back, long before the affair she had admitted to. And they showed her with a totally different man. I felt sick to my stomach. She had assured me that her affair with the co-worker was her only mistake. She swore it had never happened before. Yet here was undeniable proof that she had lied again, and that her unfaithfulness had started well before the incident she labeled as a one-time lapse. When I showed her these new photos, she broke down in tears once more, saying she was ashamed and had been too scared to tell me because she feared losing me. During one of our counseling sessions, I admitted that my trust in her was disintegrating, that our marriage felt as though it was collapsing. She clung to me, declaring she loved me and would do anything to repair the harm. But then more messages poured in. More startling truths were revealed. Each time, I found out about another affair, an old college boyfriend who visited for a weekend, a fitness instructor she had met at the gym, or even a random encounter during a work conference. Every new discovery tore away another piece of my self-worth. I tried telling myself that maybe the unknown sender was just manipulating images, but the dates and details fit Juliana's timeline too well. Each time I questioned her, she cried and vowed it was over, that there were no more hidden truths. I lost track of how many times I ended up on the couch, how often I told her we might still recover if she just told me everything, how frequently she claimed she was finally being honest. I began to feel foolish, like a shell of the once self-assured man I had been. The identity of the unknown messenger. Eventually, my desperation led me to hire a private investigator. I needed to verify that these messages were genuine. I wanted closure. Though it felt humiliating to share such personal details with a stranger, showed him the texts, photos, and the overall timeline. He vowed to keep it confidential and started investigating. It took him 3 weeks to gather enough proof to figure out who was sending the messages. It turned out to be my wife's former friend, Monica, who had once been close to Juliana years back. Their friendship had ended when Juliana had an affair with Monica's boyfriend, which made this seem like payback of some sort. Monica found out Juliana was still cheating, saw that I was totally unaware, and decided to expose Juliana by giving me all the evidence. That's what the investigator concluded, though he didn't know Monica's deeper motives. Maybe it was revenge, or perhaps she felt she was doing me a favor. In a strange way, I felt thankful to her. Without Monica's tip-offs, I might have gone on blissfully unaware, not realizing how often Juliana had been unfaithful. When I asked Juliana about Monica, she didn't deny it. She said Monica was spiteful and resentful, punishing her for an old feud. But that didn't alter the basic truth. The photos and timelines weren't fake, they were authentic. Piece by piece, my marriage was stripped bare, uncovering a grim reality behind what I had always assumed was a loving relationship. We shared these new revelations with our counselor, including Monica's part in it. The counselor gently advised that perhaps we needed some time apart, since trust couldn't be rebuilt when fresh wounds kept appearing. Juliana pleaded with me to stay and swore she'd do whatever was necessary. I felt torn, my mind torn between memories of the woman I had deeply loved and the brutal fact of her repeated deceptions. The slow unraveling. I opted to live separately from Juliana for a period, hoping to clear my thoughts. I moved into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a place with a flickering neon sign and thin walls. It was nothing like the comfortable home we had shared, yet that cramped, shabby room felt safer than the home that now symbolized betrayal. Every day, I went to the office in a robotic way, getting my tasks done with little drive. My boss noticed a shift in me, but I stayed silent. I didn't want to reveal the humiliating details of my shattered marriage. At night, I would lie on that motel bed, staring at the ceiling fan, playing back moments from my life with Juliana. Each milestone, our first date, the proposal, the honeymoon in Italy, was now tinted by betrayal. I drank more than I should have, drifting in and out of restless sleep while the TV droned on in the background. Juliana phoned me every night, leaving voicemails or emotional messages if I didn't pick up. Occasionally, I would answer. She'd mention her therapy sessions, explaining how she was finally recognizing her harmful behavior. She said she had issues with self-esteem and constantly sought approval from other men. She claimed she wanted to change and become a better version of herself. I listened, trying to believe her. Yet a smoldering anger twisted inside me. How many chances can someone get before it turns into a pattern of mistreatment? We had shared years together, and I wasn't the type of person to walk away easily. Perhaps my loyalty and stubbornness held me back from filing for divorce right away. A glimmer of hope. After 3 months of living apart, I chose to give Juliana another chance. We went back to counseling, this time with a new therapist who specialized in infidelity. The sessions were intense. We had to face the full extent of her deceit, her motivations, and my own role, my inability to notice signs, my fear of confrontation, my failure to ask tough questions early on. For a short time, it felt like genuine improvement. Juliana attended individual therapy twice a week, and I began going to a support group for spouses who had been betrayed. Hearing others discuss their experiences with cheating and recovery made me feel less alone. Juliana apologized daily and tried to rebuild my trust by being open about her phone usage, her schedule, and her new social ties. I could see real remorse in her eyes. I sensed how desperate she was to save the remnants of our marriage. We started carefully dating each other again, taking small steps. We ate out together, took strolls in the park, watched movies at home with our phones switched off. For a moment, I allowed myself to think we could get past this overwhelming betrayal. Sometimes I'd hold her hand and feel a spark of the warmth that first drew me to her. I realized that even after so much damage, love is remarkably tenacious. It clings to you, even when battered by suspicion and hurt. But trust is delicate. Once shattered, it never fully returns to its original state. I caught myself scanning her phone bills when she took a shower, scrolling through her messages to see if anything seemed suspicious. I despised the act. I despised how it turned me into a paranoid detective in my own home. Yet I couldn't stop. Whenever she left the house, I questioned where she might be going. Whenever she glanced at her phone and smiled, I felt a surge of jealousy, a flicker of doubt. Living in love without trust is agony, a permanent state of worry and uncertainty. Still, I put all my effort into rediscovering faith in her, or at least faith in the process of repairing what had been broken. The final betrayal. One afternoon, Juliana mentioned she had a business trip to Denver, a 2-day conference where she was scheduled to deliver a marketing presentation. I felt uneasy, but we talked it through in therapy. She reassured me she was fully committed to her career and wouldn't risk our already fragile progress. She promised to call every night, send me pictures of the hotel and the conference venue, and keep nothing hidden. On the first night of her trip, she called from her hotel room, showing me the glowing city skyline through her window. She looked worn out but sincere. I tried to silence the anxious feeling churning in my gut. We spent half an hour discussing everyday things, my job, the cat we had adopted after a counseling session, her upcoming speech. It was almost normal, like two spouses offering support across the distance. Then, late the following evening, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. My heart raced. I opened it to see Juliana in a hotel bar, her body language openly flirtatious with a man who had his arm around her waist. According to the timestamp, it was taken about an hour earlier. A second photo popped up, capturing them entering an elevator together. Anger clouded my thoughts. I tried telling myself it might be nothing, just a colleague. But deep within, I felt the old wound flare up again. I knew I couldn't keep living with constant doubt. In a moment of desperation, I booked a flight to Denver, disregarding the cost or the fact that it seemed impulsive. I had to see the truth for myself. I arrived at the hotel around 10 p.m., palms sweating and pulse thumping. At the front desk, I asked them to ring her room, but she didn't answer. I tried her cell phone, no response. The hallway leading there felt endless, each footstep echoing off polished tiles. At last, I reached the door to room 1722, the gold numbers gleaming on the plaque. I knocked. No reply. I knocked again, harder. Still silence. Deciding to wait, I sat in a chair by the elevator, my mind on fire with dread. The minutes dragged by like hours. Finally, nearly an hour later, the elevator doors slid open. Juliana stepped out in a short black dress, laughing at something the man next to her said. She almost fell into his arms, and they held each other briefly before she pulled away and caught sight of me. I'll never forget her expression. Shock, guilt, and fear collided on her face. The man glanced at me in confusion, then looked at her again. I stood and walked toward them, saying quietly, "Juliana, who is he?" She tried to speak but could only stammer. The man shook his head and left, muttering something about avoiding drama. In that moment, I knew it was the end. No amount of therapy or books on rebuilding trust would change her behavior. Maybe she was hooked on the excitement, or perhaps she simply didn't love me enough to remain faithful. Either way, my heart broke all over again. I didn't shout or make a scene. I just turned and left. She hurried after me, calling my name, tears streaming down her cheeks. She grabbed for my arm, but I shook her off. I entered the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and didn't look back. As the doors closed, I heard her voice echo along the corridor. That was the last time I saw her face to face. Aftermath. The very next day, I filed for divorce. I wish I could say I felt some relief, but instead I was overwhelmed by a deep sadness. I finally recognized that the woman I had loved for so long wasn't who I thought she was. I switched off my phone for a week, refusing to see or hear Juliana's attempts to contact me. She flooded my inbox with voicemails, messages, and emails, which I only discovered much later, begging for another chance, apologizing, promising she would change. But I had learned the hard way that it was too late. The divorce process dragged on for months. In the end, we sold our house. I moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town, furnished it sparsely, but it was finally mine. Juliana insisted I keep the cat, likely a small gesture of guilt on her part. We took care of the paperwork, split our belongings, and eventually signed on the dotted line, ending 7 years of marriage with a few strokes of a pen. Finding myself again. In the first few months after the divorce, I was in shambles. My mood swung wildly, outrage at her betrayal, grief for the future we had planned, and even sudden waves of missing her warmth. I knew I needed to work through the trauma, so I continued therapy alone. I also joined an online community for individuals who had gone through repeated infidelity. Talking about my experience and hearing their stories helped me realize I wasn't isolated. Many people have been deceived by those they cherished most. Gradually, I started concentrating on self-care. I began running again, something I hadn't done since college, finding comfort in the steady beat of my shoes against the ground. I tried out new pastimes, cooking classes and learning to play the guitar. Some days, I felt foolish, as though I was trying to fix a hole that could never be patched. But I pressed on, determined to rebuild my life from the rubble of betrayal. On my therapist's advice, I started keeping a journal, pouring out my raw feelings onto the page. It showed me that my emotions were valid and that healing rarely follows a straight path. There are countless highs and lows. Over time, my bitterness faded. I began to separate Juliana's actions from my own self-worth. I wasn't perfect, and I did have flaws, but her ongoing infidelity spoke more about her than it did about me. It was her choice, her habit, and her struggle with faithfulness. Understanding that fact was a breakthrough. It felt like stepping out from under a heavy cloak I'd been carrying for far too long. Reflections. I still experience moments when her betrayal hurts all over again. There are mornings I wake up and almost catch a whiff of her perfume in the sheets, even though it's been more than a year since she left. But I've come to see that this pain reflects how deeply I once cared. If I hadn't loved her so much, I wouldn't feel such heartache now. Sometimes, my friends ask if I hold any hatred toward her. I don't. Surprisingly, I feel a small measure of sympathy. She's likely battling her own struggles, searching for something she believes she can't find in one committed relationship. I hope she gets the right help for whatever issues she faces. That, however, is no longer my responsibility. I'm in the process of learning to trust again, though I'm not rushing to start a new relationship right away. Rebuilding the self-assurance she tore apart will take time. In quiet moments, I remind myself that I survived the most painful heartbreak of my life, and I'm still here. I do carry scars, but those marks show me I've been healing. A new dawn. Every morning, I open my eyes in my small apartment, sunlight filtering through the simple curtains. I brew coffee and settle into my favorite chair by the window, stroking the cat as he purrs peacefully on my lap. I think about what lies ahead. Not the future I used to picture with Juliana, but an open-ended future that is both scary and thrilling. I've realized life almost never goes the way we think it will. Sometimes, I look back on the person I was on our wedding day, optimistic, full of faith, and deeply in love with the woman who promised to be my partner for life. Losing that innocence was painful, but in its place, I've gained a wiser perspective. I've learned that people can change in ways that hurt us and that, no matter how desperately we hold on, we can't force another person to be faithful. I also discovered how strong we can be when we rebuild ourselves after everything has fallen apart. I realized that sometimes we endure heartbreak not because we are weak, but because we try to save what we hold dear. And when it becomes clear it cannot be saved, we show our strength by letting go. It's been more than a year now since that final heartbreak in Denver. I'm still unsure if I'll ever marry again, but I haven't closed the door on love. People are social by nature, and even after all I've faced, I do believe there are kind, loyal individuals out there. I take comfort in small pleasures, jogging by the river in the evening, laughing with good friends, feeling my cat curl up next to me. Epilogue. Sometimes, in the late hours, I imagine my phone vibrating or see a phantom notification from an unknown sender. For an instant, I'm taken back to that crisp October morning, standing before the mirror, phone buzzing in my hand, and my entire world about to crumble. Then I blink and realize I'm in my own place now, safe. I'm on my own, but I'm free from lies, half-truths, and the dread that the one I love is hiding something. I inhale deeply, reminding myself that the past is behind me. There's a whole new horizon to explore. I'm no longer the naive husband caught in a web of deception. I'm a survivor, moving forward one careful step at a time, ready for the next chapter in my life. And for the first time in quite a while, I feel like I'm finally going in a good direction.